This story is the best thing I have ever written. I've said this before several times in my personal life, even just to myself. But I have said this quite a few times. I'm not certain as to how many times I've ever said it on this channel. I think maybe I've said it at least once before, maybe. I don't know. But at least a few times I have said, this is my best work. And I guess the twist, the irony, this whole thing is that every time I have said that, it's been true. When I said 4 years ago that something I wrote was the best work I'd ever written, it was true. Up to that point, it was. 3 years ago, when I had said it, it was true. 2 years ago, a year ago, when I had thought that something I wrote was the best thing I'd ever written, it was true up to that point. Even this spring, when I had finished a story, I thought to myself, this is probably the best story I've ever written. Every time it's been true. Because as a writer, you're constantly growing, and your next, successive story is always better than the one before. It's always, at least it should be, right? Rarely in life does that ever happen, and at a certain point, you are going to get, the diminished returns, right, on your work. You're not going to progress as much in 1 year as you might have when you first started. It might take you 3 years to make the same progress in your writing that you might have made in your first year, right? But in general, we always want our work to be better than the one before it, and it's true now. It's true of what I'm working on here. This short story that I'm editing is the best thing I've ever written up to this point. Will that be enough to get published? I think so. I've thought that about all the work that I've submitted, over the past, 6 months or so. As far as these short stories goes, I've thought all of them had potential. I feel the same about this one. But it is the best thing I've ever written, which is an important thing to realize. Not so much for like the bragging or anything like that, but it's a good marker of how far you've come. If you can say that something you recently wrote is the best thing that you've ever written, and yes, it's an opinion, but if you can say that, it means you've grown. As a writer, you have improved, which is always the most important thing. So yeah, this is at the moment the best story I've ever written. I'm sure a year from now, I'll say that about another work, and it'll be true. At least I hope. I'd hate to think that I reached my magnum opus in my 30s, right? You always hope your work should always try to be better. You always hope for it. To peak in your 30s is a sad thing as a writer, because you got a lot of years of writing ahead of you, potentially. It's not football. You don't have to retire at 35, or I guess there's athletes today are so much older now when they retire, but all the same, you don't have to retire with over half your life left. In writing, you can do it right, more or less, probably to your final years, and then maybe when if you start getting dementia, something like that, your mind starts to slow down. Perhaps then you gotta hang it up, but that's a ways away. And so, yeah, this is the best thing I have ever written.